Okay, so now we're made it to the next section where we're going to talk about bracket notation. Okay, so take note here as well because now we're adding another layer to what you've already learned. So a quick review. Okay, what is a string collection? What is a collection? Data type. Put the description, put your answer in the comments because we want to make sure you're learning. So if you come to this channel and you found this channel and you're not a part of the actual cohort, or maybe you're a self-learner in the cohort, the curriculum is free. There's a link in the description so you can follow along, a great resource. Okay, so let's get into the curriculum. So here we are, bracket notations. Understanding strings as a sequential collection of characters gives us much more than just a mental model of how they are structured. JavaScript provides a rich collection of tools, including special syntax and operations, that allows us to work with strings. Bracket notation. We want to understand how this works because you're going to use this a lot. In the special syntax that allows us to access the individual characters that make up a string, to access a character, we use the syntax some string with the bracket with an I, and that I represents index. Now, there may not be, we always talk about variables need to be descriptive. Convention is when we use in loops, or especially because you're going to find this in a loop a lot, we use I to represent index. But I'm going to explain to you later on, I'm planting the seed now, that index is a variable inside of a loop, or any time when we're trying to get access to that particular index, we're using it to be stored. We're storing the index in a variable. I'll explain later on, but I just want to kind of plant that seed now. So here we are. We're in I, where I is the index of the character we want to access. String indices are integers representing the position of a character within a given string, and they start at 0. This is important to understand. I'm going to explain now. Thus, the first character of a string has an index 0. The second has an index 1, and so on. Consider the string JavaScript. The J has an index of 0. The first A has an index of 1. The V has an index of 2, and so on. The reason why we want to kind of focus and understand how index works, because again, in the beginning, this is going to be confusing, but as you go over this more and more over time, it's going to make sense. Index base always starts at 0. If you remember when I was talking about how we learned to count, we learned to count by adding 1 to the base 10. We learned to count that it starts off at 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's how we increment in counting in the base 10 numerical system. But in JavaScript, when we're talking about a string, a collection of strings, each one of those characters is using an index, is based on an index. Index always starts at 0. Understand, although it starts at 0, it still takes a position. In your mind, 0 means nothing, void, empty. But really, 0 has an index. It starts at 0 index. So really, that's one item. 0 is an item. That's what I want to make sure you understand. So when we say 0, it starts at the 0 index. That's actually item 1. So what that means is if I have 10 items inside of a container, but I'm saying the first item is at 0 index. I still have 10 items, so that's what I don't want you to get confused on. When we say index 0, we're saying that's the starting point, but 0 is an item. And when you go through all 10 items, the number that you're going to get for the 10th item is the 9th index, because we started at index 0. Again, if you're new to this, that may not make sense and it may be confusing, but you gotta visualize it. 0 is an item. At the end of whatever item there is, you're gonna always be one less of an index than the actual item. So if there's 10 items, the first item is 0, the last item is 9, but you still have 10 items because 0 is an item. I hope that makes sense, but you got to practice it and you have to visualize it to see it. Okay, let's get back into the curriculum. So here, an expression of the form something bracket I gives the character at index 1 or index I. So what we're saying here, this I is a variable. All of this right here, the 0 through 9, like I was saying, index 0 is still an item, which is J, which is a character. So think of items, not just only the character, but think of how many items that are in this particular collection of strings. So when all of these strings, this whole string is stored in that index, and this is where we're going to learn how to break it down. This program prints out the initials of the person's name. Again, refresher. We're declaring a variable and we are initializing the string Brandon Ike. Then we create another variable called first initial. And now we created this, here's the object right here. Because just like that dot, this bracket notation with dot is a notation as well, but it's giving me access to whatever is inside this object. This object is holding a collection of strings. I want the 0 index, think like the compiler. And what this is doing, because of this bracket is also representing an array. And we're going to talk about that in a moment in the coming up section. But we have to understand that this JS creator, which stands for JavaScript creator, in this camel case, is an object. And the bracket notation wants to get access to what's in that, holding in that object. What's in that object? This string. And now I am going to store whatever that index is in the first initial. So it pulls this information out. I'm getting access to the 0 index, which is the B, is now being stored in the first initial. Now I create another variable called last initial, and it's looking for index 8. So if I count, B is 0, R is 1, E is 2, when I say 2, second index, N is the third index, D is the fourth index, A is the fifth index, N is the sixth index, the space is an index, E is the eighth index. So it finds it at E and it stores it in this last initial variable, which is an object. Now I create another variable. Now I'm storing in this string right here, and I'm doing some concatenation here because these are strings. So we're not adding addition, but we're concatenating. So I'm concatenating this string. Notice what's going on here. I'm able to do this. This is legal. Plus, I'm passing in this variable, which is referencing whatever is at index 0 is now stored in this initial. I'm concatenating. I'm adding another string with a dot in it, because this is a string. Think like the compiler. I'm concatenating with the plus sign the last initial, which is, and then I'm using a dot again. So here it says console.log output string. It's console logging out this variable, whatever stored in this variable, because it's a container, and this is what the output is. JavaScript was created by somebody with the initials b.e.e. Now, what happens if we try to access an index that doesn't exist? For example, -1. This means something here. This -1 means something. And what -1 means, I want the end of the actual index. So -1 or an index larger than the length of the string. This is important to understand because this is going to be confusing. So here I created a variable called JSCreator, and I passed in his name. If I do a console.log JSCreator -1, what's going to happen? If I console.log JSCreator and I want to get access with this bracket notation of 42, what's going to happen? Because remember, this is giving me a collection. Let's look at this. Although this was a short section, look at how much information is here that if you don't understand, you'll easily gloss over this. So let me copy this. I'm going to bring it to the board, paste it in, and now I'm going to run it. What's going to happen when I hit enter? What's the result? Okay, so we get a console.log undefined. What does that mean? And so what it's telling me, if I do a -1, -1 is representing there's nothing there, because we're doing a -1, meaning there is not a -1 index. We start at index 0, not index -1. That's why we need to understand the difference between here, because the -1 does mean something. When we want the length of a property, we'll learn that later. But we're using bracket notation. We want to get access to the index. The number 42, there's nothing after this H. So remember, we got a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's only 11 indexes here. So let me go back here. Let me hit my up arrow. Now, let me change this to 11. Hit enter. It gives me the H. But see, -1 is undefined because we start at index 0, not -1. It's going in the wrong direction. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. Like I said, this video, although it's a shorter section, but it's a lot of information here. We haven't even touched yet what this is doing right here for us concatenating. We'll talk about that later. But I just wanted to make sure I point that out to you. Go ahead and check your understanding. And that's the end of this section. So remember, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next section.